All right. We are live streaming and we've got people popping in on Zoom and onto LinkedIn and onto YouTube. And so while folks are, if you could just contemplate the question here, what does accountability mean to you? And we're going to be talking about that as we get further into our presentation today. Kind of be threaded throughout. So it'd be interesting, I think, for you guys to think about what does that actually mean for you. And then you can see what we have to say about that and hopefully get even fuller understanding about that. But doing that in the context of this whole notion of hybrid and going back to work. So what we wanted to talk about today is this idea of these 4 authentic leader conversations and really being in a hybrid workplace. I actually just said the thing I've been trying not to say, going back to work. We're not going back to work because we've been working for 2 years for sure. Right. It's really about how are we going to use these offices, or are we going to use these offices and in what way? And just about everyone that we are talking to is working through being able to understand what that is, like really working on what does it mean to actually use the physical workspace? Are we going to be 100% in the physical workspace, or are we going to try and use our combined hybrid partly in the workspace, and then what the heck does that mean? So that's the kind of stuff that we want to talk about today. And this fits into the broader scope of our Change Leader series. So we're here in the middle, this idea about growing joy at work and how to do that. And that's certainly something that we're trying to focus on with this, because there are many ways to not do that. And so going down the path to be able to make that happen is going to be really important for a lot of companies. Certainly seems to be with all the ones that we are talking to. And we want to share some thoughts with you guys about all of that. But first, let's go back to joy and actually think about that idea.
Yeah, I was listening to Elizabeth Gilbert yesterday, who was doing a masterclass. She was talking about teachers that you never meet that have a big impact in your life. And I was thinking about that, and, who is that? And that for me is definitely this guy, Paul Pearsall, who wrote Superjoy. So I highly recommend this book. It was published in the 80s. So I read it as a teenager, and when I was struggling with some things personally, and it had a big impact on my life. The stories that he tells in here are about people who have struggled yet have this joyful outlook. And I thought, wow, if those folks can go through the difficulties they went through and still have joy at work, I certainly can. And so highly recommend this book. It's really cool. It covers a lot of ground. It also has a glossary of joyology. I've turned to it many, many years. This is my copy from back in the 80s, so it survived a lot of different things. Anyway, so that's a recommendation. Of course, there are other philosophers about joy. And if you've read this book, you'll know what I'm talking about. So the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu came together and wrote this book. And one of the things that was interesting reading this and thinking about them is this question that came up when they asked the world what they should talk about. How can one be joyful when there's so much suffering? And these are the things they said, that when we're focused on ourselves, we're destined to be unhappy. Helping others is a way to discover our own joy, and how we choose to act every day matters, and how we respond to suffering is our choice. And these things certainly speak to us and things that we subscribe to. So it's an interesting, certainly relevant today. And of course, there's the other famous philosopher, which is Cookie Monster, who wrote The Joy of Cookies. Also highly recommend. It's really hilarious. He certainly knows what joy at work means to him. So This is our connection for change and joy. This is something that we subscribe to. We think that how you introduce change can impact how much joy an organization feels, and how much joy is already present can impact how well a change goes. So it's connected as far as we're concerned. You can see over on the right-hand side, these are the dimensions of joy at work that have emerged from the research that we've done. Accountability is something we've highlighted. Accountability is a big topic of conversation for us right now because we have been in this hybrid or virtual, almost 100% virtual situation for a long time. And accountability looks different now and looks different in that situation. Because we're not physically together, you have to think about and approach how you cultivate accountability a little differently. And that's certainly what we have experienced directly and what our clients are experiencing, and certainly what we've seen in our research. And then you see at the bottom, notice signs of progress. You can notice whether or not your change is progressing. You can notice whether or not there's joy at work. There are signs all around you, and we're going to talk about that today.
And that really is sort of the underlying theme of the analytics slant that we like to take. So how do you actually measure and know? And it does not have to be this heavy-handed, very difficult thing to do. It can be, in many ways, as simple as what are the signs?
What are the signs?
That tell you about what's happening here?
All right, so we're going to focus on three things. We're going to talk about psychological safety and how that can be great context for joy, which leads to a leadership intention, right? How do you want your culture to feel, your team culture, your company culture, and using leadership conversations to demonstrate your intention. And then seeing the signs. Okay, I have this intention for joy. I have this intention for this kind of culture. What are the signs for me that it's actually showing up? So that's what we're going to talk about today. So first, we're going to talk about psychological safety and how you can use that as a way, something to consider when you set your intention. So first, we'd like to just think about where your people are focused. People's brains are primarily focused in these kinds of categories, right? They can focus on the work itself, which is about creating the value that the company needs to achieve its goals, right? Why they were hired. Or they can focus on internal strife, which is about, am I getting along? Can I get what I need from other people? Am I able to give things to other people that they need from me? What kind of politics are involved? Any kind of interpretation, related to that. And then there's external forces. So certainly we have had the pandemic as a glaring external force, right, on our workplace. So how much is the employee focused on that? And so the idea is to decrease, go to the next slide, the amount of time people are focused on the internal strife and the external forces so that they can increase their focus on the work itself, right? So, we have a finite amount of energy and attention, so that's the idea. And so the idea here is to reduce the amount of time people have to spend on those things. So what is psychological safety? Well, it's the shared belief that members of a team are safe for taking interpersonal risks. That's from Amy Edmondson, who published an article back in 1999 on the subject, and you can find a lot of work out there by her. She's got a couple of really great TED Talks that you can go look for. It's all about this, right? And so these are examples of psychological safety in action, right? So feedback is frequently requested and given with respect, with the intent to improve as opposed to the intent to critique. Members are encouraged to contribute, raise concerns, ask questions, and that's okay, right? Help is offered and received well by team members. In other words, I don't see it as you offering help as some sort of competition or some sort of slight on me, but I see your offer for help as genuine and really, truly helpful. And you can see the other examples there. And so then there's emotional capital. And we feel that when you have psychological safety, you build emotional capital over time on a team, which is a trusting relationship through those experiences that result in value for everyone involved. So team members feel loyalty to the company, as an example. Team members take risks and help the team succeed, right? They're invested in each other. They're invested in each other's success, and they take pride in being part of the team. So that's emotional capital. And we see this all connected. So starting with psychological safety and really demonstrating over and over again that this is okay. You can take this interpersonal risk, leads to that trusting relationship because you've got that emotional capital built. And you get that emotional connection, which is joy, right? You get that emotional connection to your work, to the team, and to the company you work for. That's the idea at a high level of joy at work. More specifically, this is our definition: employee willingness to do these things, to commit, to be accountable, to trust, to belong, willingness to act with cohesion, willingness to demonstrate respect, willingness to act with integrity, right? Willingness to do that. But it's a two-way street, right? It's not just employee willingness. In order to achieve that, you have to, can you go to the next slide? Thank you. And this exists when the company and leaders and managers create the conditions where this willingness can happen and extend that invitation to employees to contribute in this way. So the company can do that, right? But the employees have to constantly accept that invitation. The idea here is that no matter if a company can do all these things, but if an employee doesn't accept the invitation, it doesn't work. And vice versa. You could have a willingness to do all of these things as an employee, but if the company doesn't value it, then you won't get traction. Your intention won't get traction. Your willingness won't get traction. So it's hard to have joy at work in that situation. And when we talk about hybrid cultures, there's some characteristics that show up, right? And you can see some of these things. It's definitely less connected is what we're hearing a lot. The culture has less influence on employees. The messages are less clear. The work can feel more intense and more focused. On the good side, it can feel more flexible, so that can feel good. But what you'll notice here is that distributed team cultures are like this. So long before we were forced to work virtually, teams worked together. Teams that were distributed across locations worked together very successfully, and they had these same challenges, right? That we have been experiencing in the virtual world. And in many ways, it can be psychologically unsafe. Bringing that forward, but being aware of that, you can take steps to make it more psychologically safe. Be deliberate about it. But first, you have to be aware, oh, this is a problem and this is normal. Okay, great. That's a risk. What are we going to do about it? So that's why we call it out. And then we call out this notion of recognizing the signs. So and this is where we start to dip our toe into measures. So when we think of recognizing the signs, we think it's really effective to create measures that are across these three categories, right? So what do people say about, how they're doing? What do you observe them doing? And then what company metrics that you already monitor are changing or not that tell you, oh, we're in good shape culturally, or hey, we might have a risk. So you can ask yourself the question, what are the signs for me, what people might say that they self-report that are signs of joy at work? What might I observe? And then what might the metrics be? So just to give you a quick example, you could in the self-reported, maybe you do surveys and you ask the question, how proud are you to be a part of this team? That's certainly a self-reported thing, but then an observable could be the energy level in your team meetings, right? What is that energy level that you like to see versus what you're actually seeing? And then existing metrics could be things like absenteeism, or even things like how frequently people are late to meetings, things like that. So, or even like cameras on, cameras off could be an existing metric that you might monitor, and that's related to culture.
So what we want to do now is just kind of have you guys having that as sort of a background on what we've got going on. Now think in terms of these conversations, right? What are the 4 conversations of a leader that are really going to be helpful to kind of pull all this together and start to make progress on them? And so these are the 4 that we think about. And so just starting in the bottom right at managing, this is a conversation that's really going to be there to be directive. Managers are telling their folks specifically what to do. And as we move to the left, and more of a leading conversation, that's one that's about vision. And a good one is with an intent to inspire, so that the employees themselves can judge success. So in managing, the manager is saying, this is what success is, go do that. In leading, the leaders now going and saying, here's where we want to go as a vision, but you as individuals are going to have to judge that success. And both of those are really about making the needs of the company, or primarily about making the needs of the company move forward. As we move up to more of a coaching conversation, this is one that's really about the employee person in particular, and about helping them to be able to drive their own experience, take ownership of it, of what's going on with their own performance. And so it's still more related to the future. How do you go about judging what's going on? But now we're trying to flip it more so that the employee is able to make that judgment. And then lastly, a mentoring conversation. And this is really a conversation that's going to provide advice. It is more on the directive side. If I'm mentoring, I'm giving you the advice that's based on my experience. What have I done well and what have I done poorly? And how can I help you to learn from those? And so we want to go through these with you, because all of them are important in any context, and certainly in the context of trying to understand how to manage a team through a hybrid experience, especially if it's going to be a transition. And to do that, what we want to do is start with the intention of the leader. So these 2 questions can be really powerful. What do I want it to be like? And that's not trivial, right? That's really truly like, how is it going to feel for everyone? What is the atmosphere going to be? What is this doing to my culture? And then what are the signs that it's happening? And that's, for us, the beginning of the analytical piece of this. So how do I actually know if I'm making any progress towards the thing that I'm trying to make happen? So starting with that intention sets up the ability to be able to step into these 4 conversations with a real end goal in mind, your intention for how that's going to play out. So what we want to do now is we want to talk about those 4 conversations. And instead of just doing a regular sort of slide, here are some ideas about it, Roxanne and I thought we would give you some examples. So we're going to do a dramatic reading. And so we are not trained actors, as you'll find out here in about 30 seconds. But I think it gives you a different flavor for how all this could go as we step into each of these. And so we will have a slide up that gives you a little bit of background. But we ask you just listen to what is going on in the conversation, and how do each of the 4 of them differ as we go from conversation to conversation. All right, so now I bring you the change decision players.
Okay. So just setting the context, Jordan leads the project management team at a digital marketing company. 4 months ago, they started using a new software to manage projects that requires project teams to enter information about their work. There's an alarming trend that projects keep missing their sprints, and he's concerned about communication, especially because the company has been working virtually for a long time and many people are new. He asked his team to come into the office so they can walk through the software's workflow together.
Okay, folks, let's get started. We have a problem. Even though we've put in our new software to help us with our management of products, we continue to miss our sprint deadlines. And it's become a really significant issue. Customers are upset and we're in danger of losing one of our most important customers. So we've been working virtually for a long time, but many of you are also new to the company. And I see us falling down really around communication. So what we're going to do now is walk through the software's workflow, paying particular attention to the points around communication, all those elements of communication. And then we're going to come up with ways to hold each other accountable for adhering to them. All right, let's go ahead and jump in and see. All right, so as you look at that one, what Jordan is doing is he's being directive. He's saying, this is what we're going to go do. This is the outcome that I want. This is really a how-to conversation, right? He's not opening it up for how we're going to go about doing this. He's directing, saying these are the things that we need to do in order to make that happen. And that's a very typical manager sort of conversation, one that all of you, I'm sure, have had yourselves, have listened to from your own manager. So a lot of experience in that. But now listen for how this differs from a leading conversation, which is different.
Yeah, and before we move to leading, just as from a psychological safety standpoint, Jordan is acknowledging people are new. We have some communication issues, I think, and so let's solve this together, as opposed to being accusatory or finger pointing, blaming other teams, for example, or even blaming the software. All right, so leading.
All right, so Jackie is the CEO of a small financial services software firm and is very excited about the rollout of the new customer service program her team introduced 6 months ago. Her team has been working from home for more than 2 years, and she wants to encourage them to come together in person and use the office more now that COVID concerns have been reduced. And she's hoping to create some excitement in the idea, starting with an in-office celebration for the successful customer program.
All right, so I'm Jackie now. As you know, we rolled out our new customer service program 6 months ago, and you all have done really well making this a success. We learned a bunch even in the last 6 months and made tweaks and improvements. That collaboration has been critical to the success of this new program. I know we will be even more successful if we can increase our opportunities for collaboration. So I want to challenge each of you to consider how we can continue to collaborate as we have virtually, but now start to add in collaboration in the office. And also ask that we hold each other accountable to find ways to make this work and not find ways to stay where we are today. Our entire success depends on what each of you has in your heads. The more we can share, the more we will succeed.
And see. Right. So you can hear a little bit of difference in there, right? So Jackie is setting up a entreaty. She's challenging the team to be able to go do something. She's not saying do this. She's saying, here's our goal. I want you to help me to get to that goal. And she's talking more about why. Like, why is this important? Not how to do it. This is where we were going and why it's going to be valuable for the team and for the organization to go make that happen. So it's really a different conversation, and being intentional about each of those and where to do them is going to be critical to the success of having a powerful culture in any setting, but certainly in a hybrid one as well.
Yeah, and then back to the psychological safety part, she's calling out specifically what has worked and what she wants more of. And again, challenging them to lean into it. So you can see with her emphasis what matters to her.
All right, so now we're going to move on to a coaching conversation. And again, I'd like you to just listen for the differences in how this kind of a conversation occurs. All right, so in this case, Samira has recently promoted into management and has a team of 5 people. She just moved to a new city and has been juggling her new responsibilities while working from home and getting settled into her new apartment. Jim on her team has raised a problem he's having working with a client and wants to talk with Samira about it. Samira thinks this might be a good opportunity for coaching.
Okay, so now I'm Samira and Ed is Jim. So Jim, what's the most important thing we should be talking about today?
So Samira, I'm having a problem with a client. Every time I think we have the scope of the work locked down, they add in something else. And the scope creep is really killing us.
Is there anything that you have tried so far that is working?
Yeah. When I could get them collaborating with me on the scope document, like doing it live, we seem to agree. And it's a couple of weeks down the road that then later an email will fly in and say they'll ask for a change and the scope's on the move again.
All right, well, do you think you can build on the approach that is working, maybe by setting up a regular scope review and asking the client to not only bring in the scope items, but other things through that meeting?
Yeah, that's good. It'll certainly help, but those guys are still going to want to be able to add things in.
Okay, well, what can you do about that so you're holding the client accountable?
Maybe we should just schedule a weekly scope meeting so that we always have a meeting to be able to take care of this, but then we can just cancel it whenever we don't need it. That way, at least I got something on the calendar and they know that they're supposed to flow those ideas through that meeting.
Okay, well, that sounds great.
And see. All right. So in this case, now Samira is starting to get more into what, but she's not saying go do this. She's talking about what are you trying to achieve? And then getting Jim to think about what are the ways to go do that. You might notice that she started with what's already working, right? So try and anchor on something that's already good, as opposed to it's all greenfield and we got to figure everything out from scratch. She's not doing that. She's helping him to build from what's already there. And in a lot of ways, the goal is to help Jim to think about the problem the way that Samira would think about the problem. She's trying to transfer her problem solving skills to him. And that's not going to happen if she just tells him what to do, but instead shows him how she thinks. So really what questions?
Yeah, and then back to the psychological safety, she's not critiquing his ideas. What she's trying to do is pull forward some of the good things without saying, no, don't do that, or, being more critical of his thoughts and opinions.
All right. And so now to our final conversation, mentoring. And you're going to see, again, a difference between coaching and mentoring, because we're back more on the directive side. And so it'll be more of a, here's what to go do. So let's set up our mentoring.
Okay, so Bill is in his mid-30s and has 3 young kids. He's been asked by Amanda to mentor her in machine learning basics, which is an area that's new to her. And she's asked him to do this because the machine learning department has just been added to her department, and she wants to understand their language. Amanda asked the team's managers, the machine learning's team manager, to set new objectives to align with her department goals. And she wants to talk to Bill about it. All right, so I'm Amanda, Ed is Bill. Bill, I appreciate your help with getting this machine learning department rolling. I want to set out some goals that will really get the team inspired. What are your thoughts on how I should go about doing that?
Well, one of the things about data scientists is that they want to do new things. They want to get out there and develop the next thing, kind of push the bounds of what's going on. And that can be great because you come up with new ways to go at it, and maybe even solve problems that other people can't solve. But it can be pretty inefficient if they're trying to invent new things on problems that have already been solved. And so, they've got their hat on to reinvent what really doesn't need to be reinvented. So I suggest that you lay out 2 goals, right? So the first goal would be, we do not reinvent the wheel. If a solution exists, we use it unless we can make an improvement that's at least twice as good. whatever that is, and whatever that twice as good would mean. And that just sets that high bar for them to not just do tiny incremental change, but if you're really going to improve it, truly improve it. And then the second one would be, we bravely jump in to invent where other people are content with the status quo. And what that does, I think, is it sets up these two goals that to some extent provide boundaries around where is it okay to do the reinvention and where should you be really just taking a solution that's already there and moving forward with that. All right.
Excellent.
Into that scene. All right. So in a mentoring conversation, now Bill is providing the experience that he has, and then passing that over to Amanda so that she can benefit from. So it's got more telling in it, right? He's not trying to help her to be able to think necessarily like he does, not asking questions. He's more relying on, hey, in my experience, these are the things that have worked and these are the things that have not worked. And so that is very different than a coaching conversation. It differs from a managing conversation, and it's more really about her and like her personal development, as opposed to go do this to make a particular goal happen for the company. Certainly all those things are interrelated, and nothing is nearly as crisp as the little four squares that we showed you, but there are differences across those four. And hopefully you heard some of those differences in the conversations that were happening here.
Yeah, and just again, to go back to the psychological safety situation, Bill did not make Amanda feel stupid. He obviously knows a lot more about machine learning than she does. So she's a little bit of that vulnerability space. And he didn't talk technical language. He kept it at a level that is, really accessible and understandable for what she needs.
And so coming back to accountability, you may have heard that we used that word, showed up in each of the four conversations. So here's our definition of what accountability is. Accountability is the willingness to be held to promises made both explicitly and implicitly. And so we see accountability and the existence of accountability as one of the important elements of joy at work. And so you need to have that in place in order for joy at work to exist, and certainly for joy at work to be able to grow. And so in thinking about these conversations, accountability would be an appropriate element to have within any of them, depending on the situation. And so we just wanted to bring you back to that idea of accountability. And then I wanted to share with you a do-it-yourself guide that Roxanne and I have put together. And Roxanne's going to put a link in the chat here in just a second so that you have access to that. But it's our authentic leader conversation guide, and it'll walk you through a way to think about it. And what we've done recently with our DIY guides is we're charging all of $2 for them, and we are going to donate that money. And if you decide to get the guide, you'll have the choice of the 3 nonprofits that you see there. So we're donating to the Ukrainian Red Cross to just help even a little bit with this terrible situation that exists. And then there are 2 charities that Roxanne and I have been supporting for a long time. The Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation, which is on the hunt for a cure for type 1 diabetes. And then Ricky's Refuge, which is an amazing organization with a huge piece of land here in Virginia that is there for taking care of animals that aren't otherwise wanted. And so we've been supporting both of those for quite a while now, and recently now the Ukrainian Red Cross. So if you're interested in learning a little bit more about this and going about how to go after those 4 conversations, we give you some information about how to set yourself up and be able to feel good that you're able to take those conversations on. All right, so let's go to our last idea here, which is really like bringing this in. So we've given you some conceptual things. Now we want to talk about like how to actually go about doing this. And we want to do that with a bit of an example to kind of help drive all that together. So again, I want to remind you about this idea of setting an intention. So what do I want it to be like? And what are the signs that it's happening? Those are the 2 very important questions to ask when setting this up. And the example we want to give you is really the inspiration story for the change decision. So Roxanne and I were together working on this project, leading this very large program that had a whole bunch of people and was going to impact a bunch of employees and a whole bunch of customers, as you can see from there. About a year and a half in, things were going so great.
Yeah.
We were what we refer to as in the pit of despair. And the very low point came when the CEO of the company actually pointed to this program that we were leading and called it a disappointment. And this happened at the annual company meeting with lots and lots of people there. And you can imagine how difficult it was to have that happen and to really look up and note that we are in the pit of despair with all of this. But instead of sprucing up our resumes and going to find another job, we shifted. We did that by starting with a lessons learned activity. And we agreed never make the mistakes that we had made before. And we really aligned on what the success criteria was going to be. And it was a cathartic moment to pull through all of that for everyone, for this very large team. And what began to happen because of some of these shifts is a dramatic improvement in the morale of the team as measured through the surveys that we would do. It became a place where we were celebrating every milestone, even the silly milestone that you see on the bottom right of moving from your program being in red status to being in yellow status. Nobody celebrates that.
It was a big deal.
But we celebrated it because of the dramatic shift it took in order to make it happen. It was really as if we were under new management, even though it was the same people doing the same stuff that we were doing before, but it felt dramatically different. And that was significant. So what happened? Well, it was started with this intention, and it really started with me. So Roxanne took me through this setting and intention exercise. And then from me spread out to others to get their input on all of this and be able to pull these together. And we started acting differently. And you can see that in some of the photos. So we did fun things and silly things. We got to the place where we were all the way over and the bank president started to refer to us as the biggest success. So a pretty amazing chain for this team that came together wrapped around this idea of making it different. I think maybe the most important thing to note in here is the work itself did not improve. It was difficult all the way through.
Right.
I was on the phone every evening at 5 p.m. with the software vendor, wrestling with them about all of the defects that they had. We had people in command centers at 5 in the morning, all the way to often 1 or 2 a.m.
For like 9 months straight.
For a very long time. But it started with this idea of intention setting. I'm going to read this to you. This is what I actually wrote.
Yeah, I asked the question about how did he want it to be on the team if he had his wish?
I won't feel my stomach turn over when someone starts to speak in an executive meeting. Offers made to help each other out. There'll be honesty in the discussions we have with each other. We would hit the milestones that we have out there. The mechanics of the program would happen when they're supposed to happen. We speak openly and solve our problems collaboratively during our Friday program leads meeting. Our sentences about the program are in the first person plural and not in the first person singular and third person plural. As a group, we clearly lay out the needs of the program for the executives and get action on those needs when we need their help. We consistently state the same goals and empower the team to act on those goals with autonomy. We celebrate success in such a way that the atmosphere and mood of the team improve with each step and every milestone achieved. And when Roxanne showed that to the people that were on the team, their reaction was,
"That's what I want." They were really surprised. I think they were sort of blown away to see it written down so definitively. So it really did shift their brains immediately. And we saw evidence of that inside a week because people started coming to the Friday program leads meeting in person, on time, and they were not buried, did not have their heads buried in their laptop. They were paying attention and asking hard questions because they were into it.
So this is a clear illustration of this point that we make all the time and have in our classes. Before change can happen, the leader must change first.
Right.
At the time, I was the program lead and Roxanne was the change lead. And change happened because we changed. We changed what we talked about. We changed what we did. My attitude changed. I'm sure that was a big deal. Roxanne always had a positive attitude, so that didn't, but I didn't. And so that made a big difference. And to a bunch of people, you can see we keep showing photos of the team. And that was important for how we made the shift.
And I want to point out here that although you're seeing this team of people physically together, this group of people that was not everyone. It was 250 people, and they were located all across the US. They did not physically work together most of the time. I mean, most of the time, there are only sometimes, like maybe 3 times a year, where they get together physically.
Yeah, it was a good example. Marcella said this multiple times that, certainly what's happened with COVID is unprecedented in our lifetimes, but the interactions that are there, we do have experience with that. Lots of companies have experience with that. And we've learned some things, that we can apply now. Right. So this is not totally uncharted territory. There's some things in here that are valuable. And so we have this setting an intention exercise. It's something that we embed in a bunch of the work that we do and find that to be very powerful. So if you're interested, please check out some of our other course offerings. But what we want to do as we look through all of this is make sure that it keeps coming back to this idea of joy. So if your team wants joy, then it's going to be a matter of helping to cultivate all of that together and be able to work through these kind of exercises to go get there. One of those elements to make all of that happen is by bringing all of these different pieces together. So just as a reminder, right, this is the 3 points that we just talked about. Creating an intention that's going to include psychological safety. Roxanne's kept bringing that back for us, right? That's important, really important here. And you can use the 4 conversations to demonstrate your intention as a leader. And then to really bring it into your practice and to have some sort of measure on this, just look for the signs. What are the signs that your intention has really come to life? And note that so you can see, are you really making progress? And that's going to be true in trying to figure out a hybrid workplace, but it's going to be true for anything that's going to be a leader action where you're trying to drive some level of change. So last thing I wanted to highlight for you here, and Roxanne will throw a link into the chat on this as well, is it's important to understand who you are as a leader in order to be able to go have leader conversations. And so we put together a audio course that's self-paced, so you can listen to it in the car when you're driving, or if you want to take a break from work. And it really gets to these 3 things. Are you aware of what your leadership philosophy is? Does your team know how your philosophy guides your words and actions? And it's all set up into these 8 lessons, and there's 3 tools in there to help you get to the place where you can have a leadership statement that's clear and is ready for you to be able to share with your team. And I think you'll find that to be a very powerful experience for them, for sure, as they try and understand you better and your leadership approach. All right, and that's what we had to share with you today. So thank you for spending your time with us. I'll just leave this slide here where you have different ways to be able to get in touch with us. Many of you already know, Roxanne and I are trying to write quite a bit, and so we have things on Medium and on our blog. So please check those out, and you have a link in there to our website and ability to contact us. And if anybody's got any questions that they want to throw in the chat, we'll be happy to try and field some of those, but we are right at 1 o'clock. I want to make sure that we're ending on time for everyone.
Welcome, Eileen. Eileen says exactly the pick me up I needed today. Thanks. You're welcome.
You're welcome.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you, Eileen. Thank you, everyone. We'll go ahead and end it there.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
And hope that you got something out of all of that sparks your day a bit. And if you get a chance to tell us about it, we always love to hear about how all these kinds of things are landing with everyone. So thanks, everyone. Have a great day.